Welcome to this morning in King Street Halls, where Orkney Arts Society have teamed up with the Science Festival to present you something rather special, which joins two or three different aspects of listening and sound. You have the craft of making sound and the performer in creating the music. And the art and the craft, in this case, are teaming up with the scientific results and to discuss the scientific aspects of sound. Can I mention, first of all, that we should be thinking of sunshine? And fortunately, here we've got the sunshine of Orkney. Sunshine of Italy has produced the finest of stringed instruments down the centuries. It's no coincidence that virtuosic in violin playing from Vivaldi to Locatelli, Paganini and Viotti emerged in sunny Italy, where the great instrumental craftsmen in small towns like Cremona, Turin, Ivrea and Bologna were experimenting with the science of sound, searching for quality of response and tone using nature's raw materials of wood, horsehair, tree resin and gut. An eco-friendly environment of industry, certainly in that case. The whole business of violin making is very much a science, affecting sound from natural resources. And the sun plays a vital part in its story. The secrets of the craft were passed down from grandfather to father and from father to son, with the trial and error of methods of these scientists in sound production. The Amati, the Guarneri, and the Stradivari families left a legacy which is still in progress with violin making today. We may not have the warm sunshine of the forests of northern Italy, but the sea air of Orkney blows through a workshop in the West Mainland. And here, a father and son are producing some of the finest modern violins, much in demand throughout the world. So here we are, Colin and Findlay Tulloch, our violin makers, and Charlotte Rowan, the violinist, who is going to perform ad hoc from her repertoire one or two little items which illustrate the sound as the discussion emerges. I do hope you enjoy this morning in all that. So let's begin. I think one idea is to have a little bit of the music. First of all, there are two violins here. One has been created by father, Colin, and the other one created by Findlay, the son. Both were created at the same time, earlier this year, and they were quite astounded when they discovered that making these two violins simultaneously, the two of them produced instruments which were only 2 grams of difference, and they could only find that out at the end. But that shows you the degree of skill. You only need to be in their workshop to see what engineering is involved in the most precision making. Charlotte.
Hello, so I'm going to play a very simple melody. It's Meditation by Massenet, and I'm just going to play the opening bars of it. This is Findlay's violin, so I'm going to start with this one, and then I'll move on to Colin's after. And it should just give you a flavour of the type of sound that the violins are producing. You'll hear it's a very silky, very lyrical sound and very warm as well. So this was, thank you. So that was Findlay's violin, and now I'm going to do a swap, and I'm going to play exactly the same thing on Colin's violin. And I had a very brief meeting with them yesterday, and I got the chance to try them for the first time. And they're father and son, but also it seems for the violins that you can definitely hear the similarities with them. So this is Colin's violin.
Now, Colin is now prepared with Findlay a presentation about the violin workshop, so you can see on film, if you can see, yeah, they're working on both sides, you can see on film some sort of description, and I think you probably a little bit of commentary as well at the same time. Over to which of you are going to demonstrate this?
I'll do some of the talking. First of all, thank you for coming to the talk, and I'm going to try and talk you through how we make violins at the workshop. So I don't know if we could have the next slide.
Excellent.
So starts off with the wood, and we buy the wood from the spruce from Italy, and the maple we get from either Europe or Scottish sycamore we sometimes use, English sycamore we sometimes use, and the other, I've got a list of the woods here. We use poplar, willow, boxwood, ebony, and African blackwood also. So people often ask, what's the violin made out of, and what's the top made out, and what the back made out of. So most violins have traditionally been made from spruce on the top, maple on the back. Sometimes Stradivari or Guarneri or some of the other makers in Italy would use poplar on the back for violas. But we kind of stick to spruce and maple. So the source that we use for spruce is northern Italy, and the source for maple we use is anywhere in Europe that's really good quality. Ebony, we get that from, it used to be Madagascar, but it comes from a different source now because they basically run out of the good stuff there and put licenses and everything on it. So it comes from Cameroon. The willow we get from European willow, poplar, European. Boxwood we get from England, and African blackwood comes from Tanzania. The boxwood and the blackwood we use for fittings. The ebony we use for fingerboards. The willow we sometimes use for blocks and linings. The poplar we use for the purfling, which is the inlay that's round the outside of the violin. Could we have the next slide? So up here you can see that's us starting to build the violin on a mold. We use an internal mold.
This. Yeah.
Findlay's got the mould here, and we glue the blocks onto the mould with a view of breaking them off at a later stage when we take the mould out of the rib assembly. I think the next slide has a picture. Yeah, it's got linings going in, which is basically creates, because the rib of the violin only ends up probably about 1 millimeter thick. You got to glue the front and the back of the violin onto the rib assembly. We put the linings on, and that strengthens up the rib. It also gives us a gluing surface to go onto. And then the blocks create strength for the end pin and the neck block, and also where the corners are. Could we have the next slide? Yeah, that's just a picture of all the lining clamps when we're gluing the linings. And the next one. There's two finished rib assemblies, and you can see how little of the blocks are actually left in the corners, but it's purely for strength, to hold the violin together. Can you remember what the rib assembly weighed?
No.
It's about 50 grams or something.
I was going to say 60, but yeah.
Could we have the next slide? So onto the back or the front. So once we've got the rib assembly done, we actually leave it in the mold until we draw around the shape, and then we cut it out. And this is a bit different from Strad, that we have electricity, and we have we've got 2 of these little bandsaws for cutting out. Can we have the next slide? That's a photograph of some of the gouges and tools that we have in the workshop. Go to the next one. That's just starting to carve. I think that's a bit of spruce. So that the whole outside of the arch is all carved with gouges. And I think the next slide shows, yeah. So there's a back of a violin, and you can see the arch is all carved at that stage, and then we go on with toothed finger planes, and the stage after that would put the purfling in, which I think is maybe slightly different from they used to do it in Strad's day, where I think they glued the box together and then they inlaid the purfling, but we do it at this stage. Could we have the next slide? So that's 2 of us sitting there discussing, I think, arching.
Yep.
Which is a complicated subject because it's got to do 2 things. It's got to obviously support the plate of the violin, and it's got to vibrate in an efficient way to create a good, powerful sound. And when we study a lot of these old instruments, to work out what they're doing with the arching, and they were doing something pretty special in an engineering kind of way to produce sound. Could we have the next slide? So that's as we've got the purfling in both the plates there, and then we're starting to carve out the inside of front and back. We do have the F holes in the front there, which I think we've got some pictures of later on.
Pictures of the F-hole cutters and stuff, yeah.
Could we have the next slide? Yeah, that's the taking wood out the back. So when we remove wood on the back and the front's slightly different. obviously the back being maple ends up being probably about twice the weight of the front. But we want to remove wood from areas that that don't matter so much, and then leave the wood in the important bits for creating sound and power. And so it's violin makers call it graduation, where they've mapped out where to take wood from and where to leave wood. And we do a tuning process where we analyze modes on both the front and back, and try and get the front and the back to work in harmony with each other to create a pure sound, which takes time. You know, you can get rid of a lot of the wood quite quickly, but the last bit can take maybe 2 or 3 days just to fine tune it, to get it exactly where you want. And then every single piece of wood, you've got to basically read it, you know, because every single piece of wood sounds different. So you know, you're not working with something that's a constant. Findlay will demonstrate with these sound posts. So we've got 4 sound posts here that are basically all the same diameter, roughly about the same length. But if we drop them on the floor here, they'll all make a different sound. And okay, there's maybe not a huge difference in sound with them, but when you're putting a violin together, you know, that can make all the difference. Could we have the next slide? Yeah, and the next again.
Yeah,
So
it's a graduation.
That's our method. We've come up with a tool on a pillar drill that we can measure the thickness. So we basically drill into there so that when you're gouging, that you don't go right through the front or the back. You go down to the marks and then clean it up. And could we have the next one?
Oh, this is the video.
So this is us doing the mode tuning, and we're going to hopefully start up the video, and you'll see the. So we use a frequency generator and a large speaker underneath and the glitter on the top, and we put the plate, and the plate's actually free, just sitting on blocks of foam, and then we put the sound through. And as you take more wood out, there's two modes we use, and it's mode 2 and 5, and we hold the plates in different places, and then we come up with the frequency generator until you get to the optimal and you see it. Can you play that again? Yeah, we start with a low frequency, and then we come up until you see the glitter dancing. We do that with both modes, and then we match that with to work with the back, so that, you know, when a violinist is producing a sound, that front's vibrating, and the back then amplifies that by vibrating at a similar frequency to produce the sound and carry the sound out with the instrument. Good. We have the next slide. So that's when we do the F-holes. There's eyes at the top and the bottom. We cut them out. We made these little cutters for cutting out the eyes of the F-hole, and that's what you see there. And I think that's a drawing of F-holes of a cello, and I think that's the 2 cutters for a cello front. And go to the next slide. So
You actually can't see that so well.
difficult
It's better on
seeing
that
that screen.
Yeah.
You can see how thin the things actually ended up, where you have the light shining through. Also there you'll see the bass bar. You can see like a strip running down on the bass side. And I always wondered about this bass bar when I was young as a maker. And I asked this guy, and he said, treat the thing, he says, like a structural beam, he said. That you're wanting there's quite a lot of pressure actually going on the bridge on the bass side. And if the bass bar was too weak, the front would sink. And if it's too strong, the instrument wouldn't vibrate. So it's another piece of the violin that's absolutely critical to get it not too strong and not too weak. And you sometimes see it in old instruments where you'll see like a saddleback effect. Over time, the front's dipped just with the pressure of the strings. And some of that could be, the Baroque setup, and then a lot of instruments were modified to modern setup, where the tension's different on the instrument.
Colin, while you're in the middle of that, can I just stop you? Because some people might not quite understand what's going on inside the violin. You're mentioning the sound post, the bass bar.
Okay. Yeah.
The sound post itself is a connection between the two parts.
Between
of
the front
violin
and the
sound.
back.
But
yeah.
what's it actually doing? Is it going that way, or how does it create the transmission of the sound?
Through that little post. Through the little post.
So if you look inside the two F holes, there's a tiny little post that stands up like that, and that is the sound post. And if the sound post falls down, the violin will still sound. It will still make a violin sound, but it won't have the beauty in the tone. So you need the sound post to really refine the sound quality. Otherwise, your violin won't sound very good at all.
Why I brought that up was because as a child, more than once, having dropped the violin, I found I had to go and get the sound post refitted. So if you've got a grandchild around or a child, you're probably going to have to get that sound post sorted at some point. And it's the placing of the sound posts, which again brings in the craft of the sign and the signs together. The actual placing of that sound post, and you've also the bass bar, the placing of it has a.
So the bass bar, placing of the bass bar, we have a formula worked out on geometry for that, where we measure the upper bout of the violin, the lower bout of the violin, and we do a division thing and basically draw a line that comes down at an angle, and then it comes past the bridge foot on the bass side.
And I think it's put in where the golden ratio, the measurements where the bass bar and the sound post and where the F holes, where the eyes of the F holes are, that is all to do with the ratio of the golden ratio, and that was all calculated by, was it Andreas Amati, who made the first violin in sort of 1540. He was the one that worked out all these classical measurements. So that's all inside the violin, is you've got this ratio between the F holes and the sound post and the bass bar.
And Findlay had a go at it earlier on the year. There's lots of people tried to work out this placement of the F holes, and nobody's actually really come up with it yet. And a lot of people, the violins divided into as you say, golden ratio, and the people draw a triangle, that comes through the eyes, like a third there, and then come through there, and then work out a formula and everything. But it's not as simple as that, as Findlay found out.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time and didn't get much success.
And actually, the evolution of the violin, that in those days, in the 1500s, 1600s, the violin as we see it today was completely different. So actually, if you look at very old instruments, the F holes for them were much shorter and stubbier. And then Stradivarius, he experimented a lot, so he had really long F-holes for many of his violins, and then he went back to this shape. And it was sort of around in France, was at the time of Viotti and Violin. They were the ones that were very pioneering in changing the violin to really fit the purpose of the music that they were then playing, because they really developed all the technique of the violin. So you had people like Kreutzer and Rode, who many violinists will remember because they wrote very fiendish violin studies. But they elongated the fingerboard so that you could play a lot more notes on the violin. And they also made the neck of it sloping down. Otherwise, if you're trying to play with a really straight fingerboard, it's very difficult. So the string sloped towards the floor. They also put a chin rest in. That was Louis Spohr in the 1840s, I think. And to play without a chin rest is very, very uncomfortable and difficult. So they made life a lot easier by putting the chin rest in, because then you can play like that. It's a lot more comfortable for somebody playing rather than without it. So these were kind of the developments of the violin that happened sort of in the 1840s, and then it sort of stayed the same all the way through really to the present day.
And the other thing that happened in that period of the Cremonese, they had absolutely everything right. The geometry, the varnish, the sound, everything right. And then something was lost. They lost the varnish. You know, and as time went on, and there's lots of people, they go on, and we're talking about the sun and things earlier on, and the way that you see things and everything, and the varnish. There's so many people tried to study it and recreate it, and now with modern technology and everything, you know, there's some people that have managed to identify some of the substances, but it's not a fixed thing, because, for example, we make our own varnish from linseed oil and clothony resin, and linseed oil changes over time and becomes slightly more yellow, and so to make a brand new varnish, you're never ever going to get the look of the old varnish, because they've aged for 300 years and taken on dirt and patina and things.
Yeah, there's a very big myth over all the varnish from Stradivarius' time, but actually I think a lot of people nowadays put it more down to the type of wood that they used, and it's the type of wood that you use. It's from North Italy, and I think they choose that type of wood because it was so cold in those regions, because ideal for violin making is you want trees that grow very slowly, so that the grain that goes down, the long grain, that it grows very slowly. So you see on the violin here and on the other one, the lines, I'll stand up a little bit so you can see closer, the lines are very close together. So where you've got the dark lines, that's the winter growth of the tree, and then the paler brown colour, that is where you've got your summer. So you don't want a summer that's too warm or too wet, because then that makes the tree grow more, and then you have the lines that are much further apart, and that makes not so good sounds on the violin. So you're really, when you choose your tree for violin making, you're looking for ones that have grown very consistently and very slowly. And in Stradivarius' time, I think there was a mini ice age where it was extremely cold, and there's a sort of myth that say that that's really why his wood was so good on his violins, because there were very sort of trees that couldn't grow very, very much at all because of the weather on that.
Yeah, and I think that to make a violin, a good violin sound, the correct wood is absolutely priority. If you'd make something from the wrong piece of wood, it's never going to sound.
Yeah, because it's really the wood that has to transmit the sound to everything, and it's the one that's going to carry all the tones and the overtones. Because when you play a note on the violin, if I play a little bit, so I'll play. The notes that we're hearing, although we hear them as a C or a D, we're actually hearing hundreds and hundreds of overtones over the top of these notes, because on the violin it's not just giving you a fundamental note, it's giving you all the different layers of overtones all the way through. And if I play a chord on the violin, you'll hear it even more because it picks up even more overtones and resonance from it. So if I play a D to an F sharp, you start to pick up an undertone as well from it. So when you get your chords, you're getting a lot of different layers that really adds to the complexity of the sound and really gives it that violin sound, or what you're looking for on that.
And then when it comes to, you have your wooden box and it's white. When it comes to putting varnish on, if you put the wrong varnish on, you're just going to kill the sound completely.
So you need the wood always has to be singing through, so you don't want your varnish too thick. And am I right in thinking is there a layer that you put on before the varnish? Is it called a sealer? Or?
Called the ground.
Ground.
The ground. Violin makers, they discuss this. You go to any violin conference or any violin thing, and violin makers get together. All they want to talk about is ground and varnish, which is it's a fascinating subject. And we obviously cook our own varnish, which is a completely smelly process. But in the days of Cremona, they didn't allow varnish to be cooked within the city walls. The varnish had to be cooked out with because it was so smelly. And then it come to the point, with people having discussions about modern makers. Oh, I've cooked my varnish for 2 weeks solid, a low temperature or whatever. And we come up with the conclusion that, if you're the guy that's cooking the varnish and you're getting sent out with the city walls, you're going to try and get that varnish cooked as quickly as possible so you can get back for your pizza. So.
Just while we're on that, can I bring Findlay in there, perhaps, just to describe the amount, how many times you put the varnish on, or how long it takes for you to make it? If you give me an example of you making that varnish.
I don't recommend doing it inside the house anyway. I've done that once or twice and it's awful. Varnish, it's about 7 or 9 layers on that, I think.
Yeah.
So they're quite thin, and then after you put the layer on, you've got to let it dry. So it's like a week or 2 weeks by the time you've put a layer on, left it for like 24 hours to dry, and then put your next layer on.
I should say, folks, that Birsey is a very smelly place these days because the beach produces a lot of strange smells from the kelp, and the local farmers are out at this moment with the slurry. And of course, you've got this pair here with their varnish. So
going to the varnish, the varnish is basically 2 or 3 components. The one, the oils they used walnut oil and linseed oil. Linseed oil requires to start oxidizing, so we sometimes, or we always wash the oil to start with and then put it in the sun to start the oxidization process. And artists use the same thing in their paints, sun-thickened linseed oil. And I think there'll be a picture of the linseed oil on this slideshow someplace. That's the purfling groove.
And why, just on the subject of purfling, why is purfling important on a violin? So, you've got the wood, but why this, I'll stand up again so you can see it, it's the black lines that run all the way round. Why is that essential to have?
To answer that question, some violins are made that they just actually draw 2 lines on, but I think it was to do with cracking. So say if you got a crack at the end, it'll come to the purfling and stop.
Probably especially at the 2 edges, because they're the danger zones if you're playing anything. As a violinist, you can end up sort of chipping away at the 2 corners, especially if you're sort of Paganini or somebody and you're playing something very like circus tricks. Then these are the bits that you can easily damage on the violin. That's probably why the purfling goes all the way through.
So on this picture up here, you can see we're shining the light through, and you can see how deep that groove is for the purfling. And the purfling we make from poplar, and we make the 2 black strips. We actually do another process of cooking and chemicals and things like they did in the old days to make the purfling black. And when you examine purfling on the old instruments, there's something special about it. There's like inconsistencies in it because of the way they manufactured it. And the same as we do, we basically plane the poplar. I think maybe one of the next slides has yeah. So there's the planings of poplar that for making the purfling. So we manufacture these strips, and then I think the next slide that's just bubbling up the black stuff. You know, these rolls of purfling, and then I think the next yeah, you can see
That's
it there.
it after being dyed, yeah.
And it takes about 2. I think it's about 2 days because you've got to leave it soaking overnight in this stuff.
Yeah, and then quite a fiddly business then to put it all, inlay it,
And
Yes.
yeah, the difficult bit is when you come to the corners.
I think there's actually a slide of a corner.
Yeah, that's a purfling. That's us
So you can-
straightening out the black bits, because once it's been in the liquid and it's we've got to straighten it out and dry it. So it's almost like a washing line with all these black lines on. And
Yeah, that's the corner detail.
that's what the makers call the bee sting. You see the little sting at the end of it, and coming together with the mitre. Finney can do it, no problem with his eyesight. I've got to put on super duper goggles now to see the mitre.
You should say that the purfling's 3 layers that we join together. So you've got 2 outer layers that are black, and then the one inner layer that's white. So we like a sandwich, and then the sandwich fits in the groove.
So people have done studies, all the different makers, you know, for example, some of the Brescian makers maybe use poplar, and Stradivari and Guarneri, I think, use poplar, and some of the other makers out with Cremona maybe use pear wood.
I think it's one of the ways you can tell instantly if it's a Strad or a Guarneri is to do with the purfling.
Yeah.
And how I think because Strad had really sharp the bee sting points there, these were really sharp, and then Guarneri was slightly more sort of
His are very rough, and
and the same with the F-hole. Strads were extreme precision, and Guarneris were far more sort of just off the cuff.
When you look at some of them.
Yeah, so when you look at Guarneri, we're talking about Del Gesù, who was the son of Joseph Filius, and Joseph Filius was probably the best scroll carver in the whole of Cremona. But the son, Del Gesù, they called him. His early work was very, very immaculate and very Strad-like. But as time went on, he got more and more hurried, and he was trying experiments and possibly some of the best sounding violins in the world are Guarneri, Del Gesù. Yeah.
And today there, you get your Stradivarius, but the Guarneri one there, the 2 sort of top names that you would have, and really Guarneri is the only one that would really rival a Strad, but both very, very different in their sound. If you're wondering what the difference is, then a Strad, it's immensely powerful. It's got a super response that the minute you play it, it responds to what you want to do. It's got an enormous variety of color, and also a complexity to the sound that you will always get different layers and different sonorities. And the Guarneri, it's got more body and soul. It's a darker sound. It's a more sort of deeper tonal qualities. But it's probably worth noting that no matter what violin you get, every violin will have its own character. But above that, if it's a good violin, you should be able to get a range of colors and a range of moods and a range of characters that if it's a good violin, then it will be able to work for you a lot, and you'll be able to sort of mold it into whatever sound you want it to do, and that it's got quite a personality, and it should always be a very working relationship between the musician and the violin, because it's very much alive, and the wood is very responsive and can be at times very temperamental, at least when the violin that I play is very much affected by the weather and by the humidity as well, because the wood soaks up a lot of moisture, and then the tone isn't as responsive as when it's a dry day, for example, like today. Then the wood dries up, and then you get a lot more open seams round all here, because this is just glued on, so the seams open up, and then the violin sounds a lot more resonant when it's colder weather.
Talking about, you've just touched on the subject of glue. We use basically hide glue, and we actually use rabbit skin glue, but it actually relies on a quantity of moisture. If it dries out, it will come to bits.
Yeah, and then you get, if you're playing and you start to hear rattles in your sound, then more than likely it's because this little bit right here, the glue has melted too much and it's letting in too much air, which is not good. You don't want rattles when you're playing.
Charlotte, can I bring you back to what you were touching on just now? Different violins create different types of emotion for you as a performer. If you had a Strad and a Guarneri hanging up on your wall, if you were fortunate enough, which would you choose for a Mozart concerto, and which would you choose for a Max Bruch?
Max Bruch. Well, will I play a little bit on Findlay's violin? I'll demonstrate it.
There you go.
For Mozart, you're wanting something that's extremely precise and very elegant and graceful, and that you don't need to work the notes very hard. It should be nice and light and effervescent. So if I play a little bit of the Mozart, it's the... So everything very nimble. And it should sparkle with all your... But then if you want to play Bruch, which is, right in the middle of your romantic period, then you want a really earthy sound and triumphant sounding. So that you sort of want to just rely on the violin, that it's got a huge amount of power and it can just, project all the way to the back of the concert hall with that. But for Mozart, you want a lighter touch. And then if you want to play Mendelssohn, you want to sort of bring to life a more Midsummer Night's Dream character. You want it to be very diaphanous, so... on it goes. So you want something very light and nimble, and you want the violin to be able to just turn to these characters and not have to work too hard at getting the violin to respond to that.
Yes, it was a marvellous recital last night. If you missed it, you missed something. It was really wonderful. And one thing that I was asking about yesterday when we met in your workshop was the difference between a one-piece back and a two-piece back for a violin. It sounds like suits, I know, but it's, there are different violins and are made with different backings. And I know one of these has got a two-piece back and one has got a single. Can you make any comment on the purpose of that, or is it just fashion, or what's the effect of it on the sound? Okay,
so it comes down to the basically the size of the tree, and you can get some absolutely I personally don't think it makes a huge difference to the sound, but I think if you get a big enough tree, you can get a quarter sawn, and what I mean by quarter sawn, if you draw the circle of the tree. There's two kinds of cut. My violin's on the quarter. I think Findlay's is is mainly quarter, but it's an interesting back that he's got. But you can also get slab cut wood, which produces a slightly softer sound. And slab cut's actually cut off the side of the tree, so the bark's running round like that, whereas quarter's cut towards the centre. And you obviously need a bigger tree for a quarter one-piece back.
I think in the past, I think there'd been some research that if when it's on the slab or when it's a one-piece back, it gives a more powerful sound, but sometimes at the expense of the focus in it, that it can be immensely powerful, but it doesn't have the focus that the two-piece back has, I think, on some of the instruments, and then other ones, it might not make any difference at all. So it's got so many different components to a violin that you can make all these different adjustments, and sometimes it works and the adjustments work perfectly, and other times it can have a more negative effect on the violin. And that's why when you look through the history of violin making, you've got so many different types of violin, how they're made and what types of wood, and if they've been quarter cut or on the slab, then it does make a lot of difference to them.
And then, of course, you can get a combination of half quarter, half slab, you know, so.
I know that we're getting near the time when you want to have these questions flowing, but beforehand there is a matter of the sun, which we haven't actually touched on, except to explain at the beginning that the sun has effects. Any information that you would like to convey about the light and the use of light, particularly on varnish, for example?
Yeah, so we use, you did mentioned earlier on, UVA and UVB for drying varnish. We stay away from UVC. And natural sunlight is as much as possible. So when we finish an instrument, you basically want to make the start creating the ground colour. And if you hang an instrument in natural sunlight, that will change the colour of the wood and it'll become a beautiful golden colour. And that underneath the varnish is far nicer than something that looks white like a piece of paper. So I think there's actually a picture. A picture of I think it's slightly further on of ground on a violin.
There.
Yeah, that. So that's basically the ground on the violin before we actually put the coloured varnish on, where we've sun-tanned the wood, and then we put another substance on the wood to create a golden cinnamon look, and then that's just ready for varnish.
It's, of course, gales are forecast for tonight, so changing temperatures must also have a bearing on your making and on the finishing of your violin. How does humidity come in? Because we're dealing with wood and we're dealing with gut and we're dealing with resins. How does, particularly in climates which are away from Italy, how does humidity affect?
I actually think in a lot of ways here might actually be quite similar to Italy in terms of humidity and things. The humidity change they maybe have a better temperature, but I think there's definitely humidity there as well. And I think humidity, some people swear that, violin makers swear that humidity cycling helps sound, you know, where they make a piece of wood take on moisture and then remove it, and then take on moisture and then remove it before they make the violin.
I definitely notice a difference between winter and summer, that my own violin is much more consistent when I'm playing in winter, because it's generally a lot drier and a lot colder. And what it doesn't like is in the summer when it's much hotter outside and the air's holding a lot more moisture, then the sound starts to sound a lot stickier. Where it loves being in Orkney because you know, today is the perfect day for it because you've got sun and you've got that sort of cold breeze that it really, the wood enjoys that.
Can we go to open questions now? Are you happy to do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I think it's an opportunity for everyone who's been hearing what we have to say and all the interest that's been taking place in this. Is where are your own questions? What's been circling around in your mind? We've got about 10 minutes of time, and if you'd like to, because I know that Charlotte's going to play you a full movement of Bach, just to finish off with, but if you can. Oh, we've got a question already.
It's a question that's been going around in my mind for many, many years. Why no left-handed violins?
There are left-handed violins.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I've never made one, but basically it's a case of just putting the bass bar on the other side and the sound post on the other side, and then thinking about it as altering the pegs as well.
Bridge.
Yeah.
I think it's more a case if you're a left-handed player. I think in a lot of folk music you get quite a few left-handed fiddlers, or there's a piece that's called the left-handed fiddler. But if you're playing classical music in an orchestra and you've got a section of 50 violins and you're the one that turns up and you're playing left-handed, then you're probably going to stick your bow through somebody's ear.
Yes.
So it's probably for that consistency that's the reason. But to play a violin, you really have to be quite ambidextrous, because I'm having to do a lot of work with my right hand, but also with my left.
Sure. I mean, what's kind of puzzled me is it's dead easy to buy a left-handed guitar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Paul McCartney, my grandson, for example. And I have a background in education as well as doing work with violins. And, you know, it's quite easy in a classroom to have 5 out of 30 children who are left-handed, and all you need to do is put them in the right place. So it would be just the same in an orchestra. If you had, you know, 10% were left-handed, you could just put them in the right place, and there'd be no clashes. And yet, it's I've never ever seen anybody playing left-handed. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I don't think we'll enter the world of the left-handed trombonist.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about technology. How does that play a part in modern day violin making? I mean, do you use some modern technology?
We do. We have a spectrum analyzer on the computer, don't we?
Yep.
FFT for analysing sound, because my ear's okay, but not, you know, if I try to hear something, it gets tired quickly, but the computer doesn't, you know. So for example, you know, when we're dropping the sound posts, if we'd done that in front of the computer, it would tell you exactly what note each one of these is. So that's good. And then also people that have analysed varnish, for example, you know, they use all sorts of fancy technology for identifying the substances that's there now on the old instruments.
I mean, do modern glues and varnishes, are they possible or not possible?
Yeah, so we've kind of briefed on it ever so slightly. We were saying that the guys in Cremona had the perfect varnishes and everything, and then more modern varnishes come along, and the French and things used spirit-based varnishes, and it's for speed, for basically getting the thing varnished and out the door, and they've lost something.
Yes.
And but it's not to say that modern varnishes don't work, but we stick to the tradition.
Thank you very much.
I don't want to be negative, but have you had disasters? Have you had fiddles that you've not been happy with, or have you been able to do something with them? Or
Every single fiddle I'm not happy with. That's why I keep doing it, is to try and get the perfect one.
yeah.
Wasn't there one of you painting the windows?
Oh yes, yeah.
That's a good story.
We had a, you know, when you're making something. For example, my friend Calvin was across from the States, and we were cooking amber varnish, and he says, "You've not got enough temperature in the hot plate. This was out in Burzine outside, and we had smoke coming off this resin, and he basically said, your hot plate's not hot enough. So I went and I got another ring, and I retrofitted this ring on and bypassed the thermostat and everything. And I said, well, it should be hot enough now. And we were in the workshop working away at something. And I said to Kelvin, says, come, let's go around and we'll check on this varnish. And we come round the corner. Just as we come round the corner, there was this of smoke and this cloud that come off it. And when we got to the varnish part, it was just this black stuff in the bottom.
Talking about accidents, I sound as if I'd been accident prone as a child. I probably was. My accident story was playing in the orchestra as I think a 13-year-old, and it was in the senior orchestra in what was then is now the conservatoire. So I was feeling a bit strained by the fact of being in amongst all these 18, 19-year-olds, and came back from the interval and sat on my violin, which I had stupidly left on the trip. Louis Carras, who was at that point was the head of department, kindly gave me his violin immediately, and I've never played on such a lovely instrument. My violin was soon sorted out by a lady called Anne Smiley, who was the daughter of Thomas Smiley in Glasgow, and she sorted me out. But sitting on your violin is not the best thing to do. There's another one.
I wonder, is there anything in what is happening at the cellular level if an instrument is played a lot and well over time? Is there anything happening at a sort of because I've noticed just when you play yourself for a long period of time, it seems to settle, and I don't think it's just the player that gets warmed up. It's as if the instrument, something happens at the instrument, and if there is something there, is there an imprint over time of consistently good playing?
Yes, Suzanne. So we had this discussion
we were
yesterday.
speaking about this yesterday. Yeah.
We think that. So we're at the bench. We make an instrument to the best of our ability, and we hand it to the player. And if it goes to a player that's really, really good and can really draw sound out and play perfectly in tune, the violin remembers that all its life. And you said that yesterday about old violins that...
Yeah, that you get, because the old ones, they've been passed from player to player, and they remember, and they bring forward the legacy of that player previous. And I think it was Yehudi Menuhin had said with his violin that when he played it, and he played a certain piece, that it felt like the violin already knew that piece, and it just remembered, and you could feel that sort of just coming out from the sound.
Is there anything that you know that it's physically that you see happening? That was what I wondered.
So the vibration of the wood, it takes, I guess it takes stress out of it over time, and it makes it more relaxed.
Follow that.
Yeah.
If it's playing with the similar frequencies over a repeated amount of time, then that's also like...
To the point that people have actually invented a thing called a tone generator that you put on the end of your violin, and it plays when you're sleeping in your bed. It puts frequency through the thing to vibrate all the plates. You know.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're getting into the realms of almost into literature, because we're begin to get talking about metaphysical things, and it would make, there are a lot of authors around in Orkney, and I'm sure one or two authors or poets must be here today, getting a little bit of inspiration with all this. I can't but believe that there's a good story to be made up about the violin maker and his son, the two violin makers with two different instruments, all vying to have more personality of themselves put into that instrument. Now, I think, Charlotte, would you like to...
Yes, well, I play some...
Is there any more questions, just first of all, just in case? Sorry. Well, there is one over here. While she's getting prepared, would you like to...
You spoke about the different tones of the sound post when you drop them, and when you choose, which ones would you choose? How do you choose which frequency you want out of the sound post?
It's a really good question. I personally, if I'm going to a piece of wood, I pick the one that's got the most resonance. You know, so I'd possibly pick the one that's got the highest frequency for the same weight.
And when you're choosing wood, are you travelling to all these exotic places to choose the? How do you source the wood? You know,
Yeah. So the when we go to Italy to buy spruce, it's a really tiring day, because you're going through all these shelves of these people that have cut down the tree, and you're looking for the way it's cut, and it's tiring on the eyes, and then you're tapping the piece of wood to see how resonant it is, and then obviously feeling for density and things too. And as a rule, we kind of pick middle density wood rather than super light or super heavy, and stuff that has a big difference between summer and winter growth. If I kind of demonstrate on this. I seen another maker doing this, where he gets his nail and you can tell quite a lot from doing that. You know, the winter and summer growth. You know, the summer growth's not too soft. And then I normally have a tapping stick for tapping it, but you can hear it resonating. I'll give you that back to put over there.
Oh, Charlotte, what are you going to play?
Right, so I'm going to play, it's a modern piece, and it's by a female composer called Gracina Batsevich. And it's really to demonstrate what a violin can do in the 21st century. It's got so many different techniques that are going to be on display, and it's got a lovely opening melody as well. So it's called Polish Caprice.
what a morning it's been. Thank you very much for coming along yourselves, and thank you most of all to Colin and Findlay and to Charlotte for giving us such a most interesting discussion of the violin making and the the ability to create sound and music through instruments. We've had the craft, we've had the performance, and we've talked about the science. So I think we've had quite an interesting experience in this, quite unique, and hope that we have an opportunity in the future to hear Charlotte come back to Orkney. And we also look forward to hearing more and more about the Tulloch violins being heard and played throughout the world. Thank you very much.